Hey guys, this is going to cover the people, the important figures, the leaders of World War II, on both sides, the Allies and the Axis. And as always, when you're going through this, make sure you're jotting things down, making notes, and if you have any questions, let me know. All right, let's get started. So for the Allies, we largely have United States figures, leaders for this particular section. We have two presidents during World War II. We begin World War II under the leadership of FDR, Franklin Roosevelt. And you may remember from like 6th grade history, 7th grade history probably, that he is the president who serves the most terms. He serves 4 terms. He's elected to the presidency 4 times. But in the last term, he passes away. And his vice president, Harry Truman, becomes the president of the United States. So FDR is the leader for most of our time in the war. He passes away in 1945. And then Truman takes over in 45 and is the president who makes the decision ultimately to drop the atomic bombs on the Empire of Japan. You also have Dwight Eisenhower. He is the Supreme Allied Commander for Operation Overlord, otherwise known as the D-Day invasions. And later he becomes elected to the presidency. He's going to be the president during the Korean conflict. Douglas MacArthur is the United States general in the Pacific Theater. So when we fought in the Pacific, he was the head person for that realm. You can see him here with his pipe. That's General MacArthur. General MacArthur is going to stay in Japan at the end of the war and help rebuild the Japanese infrastructure, help create the Japanese constitution, and also maintain order and discipline while the Japanese government is going to make a transition from what it had prior to World War II to a new modern democracy. Next up are... one more United States figure, George Marshall. General Marshall is a general in Europe during the war itself, but then he is in charge of something called the Marshall Plan, which is an aid package that is given to European countries to help rebuild factories and roads and that sort of thing. It's a way to rebuild Europe after World War II. Because one of the main differences between how we handle World War I and how we handle World War II is at the end of World War I with the Treaty of Versailles, we were very punitive. We took a lot away from Germany. We launched Germany into a depression prior to the stock market crash in 1929. And the Allies learned a lot from those mistakes. And instead of being punitive to Italy and Japan and Germany, we helped to rebuild those countries and revive those countries into the modern world. And so General Marshall is the one that's in charge of overseeing that operation. Winston Churchill, you may remember him from your World War I time and the Gallipoli campaign of World War I. He was the mastermind of what becomes a disastrous campaign in World War I. And ultimately, he had to take some steps back in his career and rebuild. But by the time we get to World War II, which of course is like 20 years later, he has risen to the rank of Prime Minister of Great Britain. And he will serve as Prime Minister for the duration of World War II. So he's the political leading figure in Great Britain at the United Kingdom during the time. As well as he's also the prime minister that's going to be in office when Queen Elizabeth, who is the current Queen of England, of course this is filmed in her reign, he's the prime minister when she takes over. So like sort of to bridge the gap and give you an idea of how close we are to the modern day, a current leader of the world was counseled by Winston Churchill of World War II. Next up is Stalin. So for these next ones, Stalin is the last ally. He's the last of our the major figures for the side the United States fights on. But for all the ones that are coming next, we have a couple of extra key details as they're leading their countries. So remember that the Soviet Union, the USSR, is a communist dictatorship. They executed their absolute monarchist, Tsar Nicholas II, during World War I, and end up with, after a couple of different entities. They end up with a communist system under Joseph Stalin. One of the things it creates is the 5-year plans, which is a plan for industrialization. He also was responsible for the collectivization of farms. This means that the government took the farms and ran them themselves in an effort to maintain communism and remove private enterprise. It ultimately results in the starvation of a lot of peasants because while they're working on the farms, they're not actually allowed to consume the products that they are creating, and what the government was able to grow and then reissue out was not enough to feed the populations of the Soviet Union. He also nationalizes their factory system and couples that with the 5-year plans, which gave quotas on how much each business should be producing. He also creates the secret police, or the KGB, which you will learn about later is responsible for something called the Great Purge, which is a genocide that happens within the Soviet Union where an untold number of people are executed by the state government for doing things like speaking out against the government and that sort of thing. All right. On the other side, so you had the Allies, and on the opposing forces for World War II are the Axis powers led by Germany, which, of course, is being led by someone named Adolf Hitler. That's him up there in the corner. And he comes to power in a world where Germany is under a massive economic depression, which is going to weaken their government. And as a result, Hitler becomes elected into power and starts chipping away at the system that was already in place, the democratic government that was in place in the Weimar Republic, because he was able to pass specific laws and eliminate certain things. And that system where he was able to break it down until he had ultimately all the power allowed him then to introduce this and nationalize this culture of anti-Semitism, or the hatred of the Jewish population. That's not what I meant to draw there. That looks terrible. This anti-Semitic culture is the key to the Holocaust and how the Germans are able to institute the system that ultimately ends in the slaughter of millions of people. They also have an extreme nationalist system where people were being taught to be proud to be German and that you have to follow the government regardless of the government's stance on things, because that's what it meant to be a good German citizen. And he introduced National Socialism, which is what we translate into Nazism, but it's that concept that you're all working within the same system and government, and you follow the letters to the legal system to a T. There were national programs that all children had to be involved in, all German children. They excluded, of course, certain populations like the Jews, but they were like Hitler Youth, where the sort of like the Boy Scouts, except that you had to be in it. And it was not about survival skills and not trade like buying and selling, trades like being able to do a skill. But the Hitler Youth was about military training. So they were training their populace from elementary school to be good Nazi soldiers. They also, under Hitler, are going to begin occupying nearby countries, including Austria and Hungary and Czechoslovakia. Those are the first places that come under Nazi control, and it's not until Hitler is going to invade Poland that the United States, the Great Britain and France declare war on Nazi Germany. He's also the one that comes up, of course, with the final solution, which is what he called the solution to his Jewish problem. That's the term he used to use, the Jewish problem, where he not just was moving Jewish people into separated places and cities and calling them ghettos, not just restricting who could patronize specific businesses where you had Jewish businesses and not Jewish businesses, but where they instituted extermination camps using gas chambers and that sort of thing to systematically eliminate the Jewish population from the earth. Next up in Japan is Hideki Tojo and Hirohito. Hirohito is the emperor of Japan, and Hideki Tojo is the Japanese general in control. Neither of these people are executed at the end of the war. Hirohito actually maintains his emperor's position. He does have to renounce his divine right that his family had been claiming for thousands of years. But the Japanese imperial family is still around. They are still figures in Japanese culture. But during World War II, they had developed, and during the 1930s, 1920s, 1930s, they developed a very militaristic system. They were building up their military. They were industrializing their military system. And that led to a need for more raw materials in order to continue their industrial revolution and continue their factory system, to continue to produce modern goods, which then led Japan to invade land around it, including Korea, Manchuria, and then ultimately the rest of China. And they're going to start taking over all the islands sort of south in the Pacific in an attempt to increase their power, increase their economic abilities, and build up their military and build up their supply chains. Next up, you have Benito Mussolini. So Mussolini is the prime minister of Italy under a fascist government system. So fascism is not a democracy. It's not communism either, but it's more similar to communism in that you have no rights, you have no ability to go against the government and that sort of thing. But there's not this concept that everyone is equal. In fascism, there are clearly people who are on top socially and economically and politically, and you have to do everything that they tell you or they just kill you. That's sort of the system in place. It's what Nazi Germany looked like as well. When you're trying to come up with like what would that be? I am going to move my little camera right here. Let me move it over here. That's better. Probably should have had that there the whole time. But Mussolini had this desire, this nationalist pride desire to expand Italy back into what it was like during the Roman Empire. And one of those steps that he takes is he invades Ethiopia. Now, this is Ethiopia way down here in the bottom, right, where I had to move my camera. So he invades Ethiopia, but it gives him an Indian Ocean port. But it's also part of this, like, getting back sort of at people in history, because during the imperialism periods of the 1800s, the Ethiopians are the only ones who were able to successfully ward off the advances of the Europeans, and it's because they had an armed revolt. They fought against the Italians as the Italians were invading and won. And so he goes back in with their newer technologies of World War II, and they take it over. But his goal was to restore to the glory of what Rome once was. And I'm going to just color this in. This is what Rome once was, right? So this was his dream, is to restore the glory of Rome. Obviously, it doesn't happen, but that's what he wanted to have happen. He wanted all of this under Italian control. So that's it. That's all of them. I know that was a whole lot of people all at once. They are listed in your vocabulary, so I definitely recommend going into your Quizlet and clicking through those flashcards and those matching drag and drop games and that sort of thing to get all these people sorted. Of course, you could always just make old school like index card flashcards. That might help too. And if you have any questions, let me know. Bye, guys. See you next time.